Hi, thanks for checking out my video clinic. I'm Mike Conrad. I teach at the University of Northern Iowa, and I chose the title of my clinic from a Charlie Parker quote. He said, "It's just music. It's trying to play clean and looking for the pretty notes." And today, hopefully, I'll be able to give you some tools to help your students find the pretty notes in their improvisation, to assist them with hearing tension and release and making good and musical note choices in their solos. I think you'll agree that one of the biggest barriers when it comes to improvisation, either learning it or teaching it, is fear. And our students tend to have a lot of fear surrounding improvisation, especially if they haven't been exposed to it until they get to jazz band, which I think is sort of a problem with our music education system, and that's maybe a topic for a different time, but just briefly, imagine how different it would be if from the very beginning of our instrumental music instruction, students were taught to and encouraged to improvise at a very young age, and it just became a normal thing, part of what they do when they make music. Then we wouldn't have this barrier to get over when they get to high school or junior high and they first kind of encounter improvisation in jazz band, which is, I think, another problem. Improvisation shouldn't just be relegated to the jazz ensemble. It should be just a part of being a musician. So that rant aside, I think one of the main things that causes that fear for students is note choice. Just the first thing they tend to, I'm sure you've encountered this when you're sort of trying to coach a student to, or get a student to agree to play a solo, is they want to know, what notes should I play? Give me a scale, give me something. They don't tend to stress too much about rhythms or phrasing or any of that stuff, and that stuff, of course, is really important, but I think the thing that's most tied to fear when it comes to young improvisers is this issue of note choice. So I think we need to reframe how we talk about note choice in improvisation. There are a lot of methods out there that talk about avoid notes, or this idea of wrong and right notes, which I think is dangerous and only feeds that fear for students. We don't want it to be this kind of like hot lava, don't play an F sharp or you lose 1,000 jazz points kind of thing. People often say and often hear, you're only a step away from a right note, and I think that's maybe a better way to approach thinking about this. So I always think about it, again, in terms of tension and release, so that we can teach students to hear resolutions, ways of resolving that tension, because we're all going to land on notes that we don't intend to. That's a part of it. That's a part of improvising and taking risks in this music. So something simple you can do to help train your students' ears with this is to give them a chord, don't tell them what the chord is, and give them a note to play against that chord, and have them decide in the moment, in real time, using their ears, what that note wants to do. Does it fit that chord? Do they think it sounds good with that chord? If so, they should hang on to it. And if not, where does it sound like it wants to go? And I think you'll find that all of your students, probably, maybe with a couple of exceptions, will be able to do this pretty easily with this first just very simple example. So I like to give the student the fourth scale degree while I play just a major chord against that. And it could be a major triad or a major seventh chord or whatever. So I may have them play this, and that, which is an F natural, and then I would play a C major chord. And the idea is not to tell them that that's a bad note or that they shouldn't play that note, but to have them decide for themselves, using their ears, what that sounds like, what that feels like, and what it wants to do. And I think you'll find that almost all of them are going to want it to go there. And them having that experience of feeling that tension and release, making that decision for themselves, is huge, because that's a big part of what we want them to do when they're improvising. And it doesn't matter that they know that that's a 4-3 resolution, or that I'm playing a C major chord and they're playing a concert F to an E. What's more important is that they're just engaging their ears and hearing that tension and release. So I'll show you a couple of examples. I did some Zoom lessons recently with a few high school students, just to try out some of these concepts and to show you all what this looks like with real students. All right, you're a junior this year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's what I thought. So the first thing I wanted to do is kind of do some ear stuff. And you don't have perfect pitch, right?
No.
Yeah, me neither. So this will just be, I'm going to play a chord and ask you to play a note. And then what I want you to do is just kind of use your ear to try to resolve that note in a way that sounds natural to you. All right?
Okay.
So for the first note, just a B flat, all right? Great. I'm gonna play a chord now, and I want you to play that B flat, and then just move it to where you hear it going. Yeah, cool. So do that again. Start on the B flat, and then
Okay. Yeah.
make that resolution. I'll play the chord. There you go. Yeah. So your note is going to be F, all right?
Okay.
So I'll play the chord first. Yeah. So the first one you heard resolving down by a half step. Second one you heard resolving up by a half step. Great. Let's do another one. Let's do E natural.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. Cool. Let's do that one again and see if you hear a different resolution. Right. Cool. Yeah. So in that case, you went up a few half steps. Yeah.
Do you want me to keep it just within a half step or?
No, it doesn't matter. Whatever you're hearing.
Okay. Cool.
It's just so happened that most of them have been half step resolutions, which tends to be the case. Let's try one more. I'm gonna give you a note that is in the chord, but then I'm gonna change the chord, and I want you to change your note to fit the following chord. All right. And there's really no right or wrong answer. It's just kind of whatever you're hearing.
Okay.
So let's give you an A flat. All right. And then I'm gonna change chords, and you change your note to something that you think sounds like it might fit the next chord. All right. So play that A flat. Yeah. So what did you change to?
A G.
Yeah. Do you recognize this chord progression? 2-5. Yeah. And it happens to be a B flat minor 7 to an E flat 7. So what you were doing was playing the 7th going to the 3rd.
Right.
Cool. Now I want you to hang out on the E flat when I change chords and just hear the tension of that. All right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you really want it to go there, right?
Right.
There's so many different ways of doing it, but first just hearing that half step resolution is really important. Okay. Now let me give you another one. Let's say C. So start on C. So what two notes did you play there?
That time I played C to D.
Yeah, so you heard that going up. Now try a different resolution. Start on C. And where did you go there?
The B flat.
Yeah, cool. All right, now start on an A. Good, so you heard that one going up as well. Now try a different resolution with that one. Nice.
Yeah.
A lot of different places it can go. So again, it's not enough to just say it, to just tell them these are the good notes and these are the bad notes, avoid these, play these. I think it's crucial to have them hear it, to have them go through that process of feeling the tension and hearing the tension and making the resolution happen themselves. That's going to build their ears, of course, and it's also going to give them more confidence when they stand up to play a solo. So let's talk about how this concept of tension and release applies to the blues, since that's probably the most common chord progression that our students encounter when they're learning to improvise. So one of the issues with this is the main tool that students are often given to improvise on the blues, and in some cases, unfortunately, the only tool, is the blues scale. And the blues scale is a tool for creating tension. There's quite a bit of tension in that scale, and I'll just demonstrate that briefly by playing the notes of the blues scale against the chords of a B-flat blues. So if we have a B-flat 7, obviously this note isn't creating tension. That one creates quite a bit of tension. Tension. Tension, but also maybe a color tone. That's a chord tone. That's a chord tone, all right? So some of those notes work really well on that chord, others not as much. Let's go to the next chord of the blues, the 4 chord. So those notes are all chord tones on the E flat 7. That note provides quite a bit of tension, a little bit of color, more stability there, a lot of tension there, right? All right, now let's take the 5 chord. Tension. Tension, but usable. Chord tone, and some usable tension there too. But we hear that on all of the main chords of the blues scale is providing us with some notes that don't fit the chord changes, which again is not necessarily bad as long as our students are being taught to hear the tension and opportunities for making resolutions. Cool, so what are your thoughts?
The B flat was a note of tension, and the C sharp was too.
Okay, yeah. G sounded pretty stable, right? D sounded like it fit, was stable as well. What about the F?
I thought it could work, like in some circumstances.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds like it kind of fits the chord, but also it could go somewhere, right? It could go up there. And you said the C sharp.
That was tension.
Where does that sound like it wants to go?
Up to the 5th.
Yeah. And that's a lot of times how it's used, right? That sort of thing. What about the C? Play that one. How does that feel?
Maybe it wants to go down.
Yeah, sure. So now resolve it. Yeah. So it's interesting. We've got this blues scale, which obviously we can do a lot with and can sound great in certain situations. But on the very first chord of the blues, and the chord that shows up the most often, we've got at least 3 notes that are creating quite a bit of tension, right? That don't really fit the chord. And I think to some extent we want some tension because like there should be some pain in the blues. Like that's part of the history of the music. But we don't want to have just tension, right?
Right, yeah.
What you just did, that hitting that major third is such a great way to relieve tension. It's really interesting. I recommend you take the time to do this with your students if you get to see them for individual lessons, or you can find some time after or before school or something. To just 5 minutes of doing this, I think will really open up their ears and their minds to this concept of tension and release, especially as it relates to the blues scale and the application of it in the solo. So my argument here is not that the blues scale is inherently bad, but that if you're using it as a tool to try to give your students a safety net of these are all good sounding notes to play on this progression, you're not really setting them up for success, as we just heard. And I would argue that if you're taking that kind of blanket scale approach to playing over the blues, the minor 6 pentatonic is actually a more helpful scale for fewer tension tones and and more notes that are gonna fit the harmony. And I think students have an easier time creating melodies within this scale. So that sounds like this. So here we've got those fit, a little bit of bluesy tension there. That fits. That fits. Change chords. All of those fit the 4 chord beautifully. And on the 5 chord, we've maybe got one note that doesn't quite fit. But all the rest of them work really well. A tune that demonstrates this well is Centerpiece by Harry Sweets Edison. And there's a really good arrangement of this geared towards younger jazz ensembles. That's worth checking out. I can't remember the arranger on it, but so that melody uses the notes of this scale. Sounds like this. It's the same, that same phrase 3 times. Tension here, and release. And every phrase ends on this chord tone here. And we get this, which provides a little bit of tension, which then is resolved. So it's a great example of creating a melody within that scale. So I'd encourage you, if you're on team blues scale, for a starting place, start experimenting with using this other scale with your beginning improvisers on the blues as that blanket scale approach, and then combined with the many other tools you're going to hopefully provide them down the road. I think it's definitely worth exploring, and I've had a lot of success with using it in my teaching. And let me just say, when I'm judging or clinicking at jazz festivals, sitting back in the gymnasium and listening to band after band and students playing chorus after chorus on a B-flat blues, I desperately want to hear that major third, just a resolution of that tension. I would trade my Walking Taco, prepared lovingly by the band parents, just to hear the D natural on that B-flat 7 in the 3rd bar of the blues. So I would encourage you to start getting your students to hear this as a possibility. There are many great recorded examples of this idea of using the blues scale, but then resolving that tension. So check out a couple of examples from the lessons that I did of students using this idea of blues scale for tension and chord tone, specifically the major third, for resolution. Basically, I'll have you play 2 bars of just using the blues scale, and then in the 3rd bar, I want you to resolve to the B natural.
Okay.
And that'll happen for every phrase of the blues, because the way that it's organized, it's 12 bars, and it's organized in like 3 different phrases of 4 bars each, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the 1 chord, that G7, should come back in the 3rd bar of each phrase.
Right.
So that's a great place to make those resolutions happen. So I'll give you a quick example chorus. So then we have, what we're trying to create in our listeners is this sense of like, when you have the end of your phrase, right? And if we don't give them those tension relieving moments, it's just like this the whole time, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So put the play along on, and for 1 chorus, use just the blues scale. So tension, tension, tension. And for the 2nd chorus, let's try that phrasing that I was just doing with the release in the 3rd bar.
Sounds good.
Yeah, great. Let's try the same thing on a concert F blues. All right, and let's avoid that first chorus of tension and just go to what you were just doing. 2 bars of blues scale, and then in the third bar, make the resolution. Yeah, great job. So, and you were even had some moments with those delayed resolutions, right? Where you can put tension, like the chord changes and you're not quite there yet, you can delay the resolution with chromatic approaches. Or have you worked on enclosures with Mr. Chris as well?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that's where you start above the note and then go below it and kind of surround it. So these students obviously have a little more experience than your typical high school jazz band student. Lauren has been studying with our director of jazz studies here at UNI, Chris Mertz, for some time now. So these concepts aren't entirely new to her. Obviously, he's been showing her some of these things, so she was able to latch onto them maybe a little more quickly. Likewise with Eli, you know, he lives in Cedar Falls. He's been coming to our UNI Jazz Band 1 concerts for years, been coming to the combo camp at UNI, studying with Bob Dunn. So just to toot the UNI horn a little bit, obviously those things have had a positive influence on his ability to hear form, you know, through listening and studying the music. And that's the next thing I'd like to talk about is the ability to hear harmony and how we can help our students with that so they can keep their place in the form without counting bars, but with using their ears. And the thing that is really crucial for that is for them to have a clear aural image of what the root progression is. So to be able to play the bass notes of whatever tune it is, whether it's the blues or some other solo form, to be able to sing and play the roots of the chords on their instruments. And this is something not just for your soloists, but I'd recommend everybody in the band should learn how to play the roots on their instrument. It's going to give them a much better ability to hear what's going on in the music, and for the students who are going to stand up to play a solo, they now know what to listen for in the rhythm section, and they have something to kind of keep them on track with where they are in the form. Once they have the foundation in place of being able to play the roots in time over the chord progression, they're able to hear where those chords are changing and where they might introduce new notes that are outside of just the blanket scale approach to hit those tension and release points. The next step after learning the roots would be to introduce the other chord tones, the thirds and the sevenths, that give us the details of the harmony. So if you're able to get the students to not only play the roots in time on their instruments, and it could just be whole notes along with the rhythm section or whatever, but also to teach the thirds and the sevenths and find the nearest third and seventh in the next chord to connect the dots. And once again, not just on the blues, but on any solo form you're playing. The other thing this does is just from kind of a classroom management or rehearsal management standpoint, gives the students who are maybe not soloing something to do. So it allows you to rehearse the solo section, and instead of it just being the rhythm section and your couple of soloists, if that's the case on that tune, you can have the other members of the band playing roots or playing chord tones behind those solos, so they're involved in the process, and that, you know, keeps them busy. It's giving them some tools so when they build up the courage to solo, they have some stuff to play and they've got their ears on the right track. But also it's feeding the soloists that information that they need to hear. They're hearing the roots and they're hearing the thirds and the sevenths coming from their bandmates, so it just kind of boosts their confidence in where they are in the form. Now, to really expand from this, to truly learn the language of jazz improvisation, it's a very difficult thing. It requires a lot of listening, a lot of study, a lot of patience and practice. And, you know, I'm not here to tell you that it's easy or that there's a shortcut. I'm just trying to offer some tools to get your students started and to get them hearing the right things and building their confidence so that hopefully you can send them down the right path so they get excited about doing that work. So to recap these couple of main points so far, they have to know the form. They have to be able to hear, sing, and play the root notes, ideally the guide tones as well, and then the next step would be to play scales in time over the form. And then 2, we want to open their ears to tension and release, to be able to hear and execute resolutions is so much more important than knowing the theory that's behind it necessarily, knowing the sort of musical math of it, because music is sound, and that's the bottom line. If it sounds good, it is good. Okay, applying the pentatonic scale in different ways to access those pretty notes. This may seem like it's going to be an advanced concept, but it's really not. The pentatonic scale is just 5 notes, so it's actually simpler than the major scale. And because it has fewer notes, there are more applications, there are more situations it can work in, and different ways we can use that scale to our advantage. Now really, any collection of 5 notes could be considered a pentatonic scale, but the one that we're most familiar with is to use scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 of the major scale. As in the bass line to My Girl. Or 1,000 other examples. But if we take this note and put it on bottom, now we have a minor pentatonic scale using those same notes. We're just centering it around a different tonic. I personally tend to use the minor pentatonic scale, just the way I usually like to think about it and the way that I hear it. But if it's easier for you to think of the major pentatonic scale, you can also apply that in many different ways, obviously. This collection of pitches, these intervals, this pentatonic scale is over 50,000 years old. It's an ancient scale that's been used in all sorts of musical cultures and musical styles over the years. It's almost inherently melodic. It's really easy to make melodies within this scale, which is why I love it as a tool for young improvisers. To bring it back to the topic of tension and release, what the pentatonic scale essentially does is remove the tension from the major scale. If we take out scale degree 4 and scale degree 7, we're removing those half steps in the scale. This one wanting to pull up, and this one wanting to pull down to the 3rd. And the 4th and the 7th in the major scale form a tritone interval, which is also obviously tension. So when we get rid of that, we're left with these notes that like each other, that don't have a whole lot of tension, and provide this easy way of making melodies. So we're going to talk about some different ways to use this scale to apply it off of different chord tones to access some more colorful notes in the harmony. First application I want to show you is using the minor pentatonic scale from the 3rd of a major 7 chord. Again, might sound complicated, but I'll give you an example from the lesson I had with Lauren Troutman where we walked through this together. Again, I like to engage the students in the process of really hearing how this stuff sounds and how it works against harmony, so they can decide for themselves, which notes they think sound the best. And they're really feeding their ears this information. You'll see us go through each note of the scale and talk about how it relates to the chord. Now she's playing alto saxophone, so I'm speaking in alto transposition, A major 7 chord, and we're using C sharp minor pentatonic. All right, so I'm going to play that major 7 chord, and I want you to play up and down the C sharp minor pentatonic scale, all right? Yeah. Hear how nice that sounds against that chord?
Yeah.
So break it down into which chord tones are being used. We said we're starting on the third. That's the C sharp. What about the E?
The fifth,
Yep. F sharp would be,
the sixth,
and G sharp.
seventh,
Right. And then that leaves us with B.
the ninth.
Yeah. So which notes are we leaving out of, if you think about the A major scale?
Just the fourth.
The fourth, and we're actually not playing an A either, right?
Oh yeah, true.
Yeah, and the fourth is a good one to leave out because it just kind of clashes against the third, right? You can hear that tension there. And the root you don't really need because the bass player plays the root. So I'm just going to vamp on that A major 7 chord, and I want you to just kind of, play around, explore that scale a little bit, find which notes sound good to you. It'll be out of sync because of the lag in internet, but don't worry about that. Just play what you're hearing. All right. I'll just do kind of straight eights like bossa nova. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Good. So which notes sound the best to you or the most colorful?
I like using the 9.
Yeah, I like that too. I heard you going back and forth between the ninth and the major 7th a lot. Obviously, you can play minor pentatonic on a minor 7 chord, right? So when you get to like the D minor 7, you can just play D minor pentatonic, which is a half step up from that C sharp minor pentatonic.
Right.
You can build some cool kind of motivic connections that way if you're going. I'm using just pentatonics from the third on the major 7 chords and from the root on the minor 7 chords. Lauren sounds great, and she sounded great on that tune coming into the lesson. I'm not taking credit for it. She had been working with Chris Mertz on targeting guide tones on it, which had really helped. But what I noticed after we spent some time isolating those pentatonic scales and vamping on them, giving her some time to kind of bathe in that sound and find what her ears gravitate towards. In context, when we went back to playing the tune, on those major 7 chords in particular, she was finding those pretty notes that she gravitated towards when we isolated them. So I highly recommend you showing your students the way this can work, and I think you'd be surprised at how mature they can sound, when given the right tools. I also had a lesson with Avery Sousa, who's a sophomore trumpet player from Ames High School. And with Avery, we were working on these pentatonic applications as well. And we used this to bridge the gap between a D minor 7 chord and a B flat major 7 chord on a tune he was working on, realizing that you can use the same minor pentatonic scale for both of those chords and create more continuity and flow between those chord changes. We also looked at further applications of the minor pentatonic scale, like starting it from the 5th on a minor 7 chord to access the 9th and the 11th, or starting it from the 2nd scale degree to access the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th. So depending on whether you're going for more right down the middle of the harmony or more accessing those color tones, the Charlie Parker pretty notes, you can choose these different applications. And Avery had a great ear for picking those out and mixing and matching them as we applied them to this tune he was working on. does this make sense, these numbers underneath?
Kind of.
So what those are scale degrees.
Mhm.
So if you think about this, your C scale, C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4,
Yeah.
G is 5, right? So it's that same kind of concept here. So if you were to play an A and the chord is D minor, what number is A on that chord?
Fifth?
Yeah, D, E, F, G, A, exactly. So that's what those are about there, all right? You already know what this one sounds like. I'm going to play this chord, and then I want you to play this scale over that chord and kind of hear what the 5th, the 7th, the root, the 9th, and the 11th sound like a little bit, all right? So try that. And we already heard Avery applying those pentatonics both from the root and from the 5th in his solo just a moment ago. I also went over a lot of different pentatonic applications with Eli Smith in his lesson. Because Eli is an advanced improviser for his age, we were able to get into some more complicated applications, and he seemed really excited about them. So this is a concept that you can use to challenge your overachievers as well, you know, encouraging them to just explore and find other ways of using this approach. So here's Eli trying out the minor pentatonic from the 3rd. Nice. Now, all right, so let's expand on that idea because you're obviously comfortable with the playing that minor pentatonic off the 3rd on a major 7. What are some other pentatonic applications you could use?
You could do it off the 7, couldn't you?
Yeah, what does that give you?
That would be like 7, 9, 3, then sharp 11, 13.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really nice one if you want even more color.
Mhm.
You've got the 3rd and the 7th in there that define the major 7 sound, but now you've got this extra brightness coming from that A natural. So this is like if you want to throw that Lydian color in there, but you still want to take out the root that you don't really need, and in some cases we might even hear that as creating tension with the major 7, right? And then the 5th, which doesn't add a whole lot of color, it's not really hurting anything unless it's creating tension with the sharp 11, right? So we're taking the root and the 5th out of the equation and playing all the pretty notes that surround that.
1, 2, 3, 4.
If you want a good kind of sus sound, let's stay in the key of E flat for a second and think of the 5 chord, B flat 7 sus. What might be a good minor pentatonic to play on that sound?
You could use. Could you use F?
Yeah, so that gives you 5th, 7th, root, 9th, and 4th or 11th, right? Just sticking to just thinking F minor pentatonic over sus, that's one option. What if we had B flat 7 altered? This one might take a little bit more thought.
With a sharp 5.
Yeah, so sharp 5 and flat 9.
Okay.
And implied in that is also the sharp 9 and the flat 5, right? So you've got altered 5ths and altered 9ths.
No, the F wouldn't. Oh man. Yeah, that sounds trickier.
Here, I'll start playing it and see if you can
Yeah.
find.
So that was off like the minor third, I guess. The sharp 9.
So check it out. You start on the sharp 9, then sharp 11, or flat 5, sharp 5, the dominant 7, flat 9.
Yeah.
It sounds good, but like I don't know. It's like not. It's like outside, but like it sounds good.
Yeah, sure. Cool. So let's take a tune that I know you know, because I've heard you play it with the big band at Cedar Falls. There'll Never Be Another You.
Yeah.
Since it's in this key, and on those E flat major 7 chords, use your G minor pentatonic, or D minor pentatonic if you want the Lydian color, and then let's see if you can apply some of these pentatonics from the sharp 9 as well.
Okay.
Right, so it'll be kind of hard to do on the fly, but there are several opportunities for it and something you can practice going forward. Like in the 4th bar on that G7, you can play B flat minor pentatonic. Going to the C minor, right? And on the E flat 7, you could play F sharp minor pentatonic. And you get all these chromatic notes outside of the key that give you kind of one of those whoa, and then resolution. But the main one I want you to focus on is the B flat 7, since that's what we're just dealing with. But if you can get some of those other ones in there too, that'd be great.
Yeah. I probably could have found a cooler note than E flat to resolve too, but.
Well, and right away your ear told you to bring it down to the major 7th, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, yeah, that's the idea, and then you just work on sticking the landing, so to speak, to make those resolutions. But you hear what kind of sound that has against that chord. It's kind of cool because it does fit the harmony, but it also has that feeling of kind of giving that tension, that out sort of feeling. Like if I were to take that to the extreme, I'll give you a quick little example here, where I'll play basically just pentatonics on this tune. All right.
Yeah.
Right, so there's all this stuff that like this angular kind of stuff that jumps out at you, but you still have that sense of tension and release,
Right.
especially the dominant chords resolving. To hear those, it goes back to the very first thing we did, just hearing those resolution points that are really important.
Yeah.
So yeah, some stuff for you to mess around with as you're stuck in your house.
Definitely, yeah.
Here's why I think this pentatonic stuff is so useful. To take it back to the fear factor. Extensions and alterations are scary. Students see a 13 in the chord symbol and they freak out. Pentatonics are easy and approachable. They're not scary. So you can hear me explaining this philosophy to Lauren. It would almost be impossible if you're soloing to think, okay, I want to play the sharp 9, the flat 9, the sharp 5, and the flat 5 all in this bar, like while it's going by,
Yeah.
But if you think, okay, all I have to do is play the G minor pentatonic scale, and you've practiced all your pentatonic scales, then suddenly you've access to all those notes and all those crazy extensions through like a relatively simple scale, And to Avery, I guess my recommendation to you is the same way that you've learned all your major scales, I'm sure, in all 12 keys, is to learn your pentatonic scales as well and get really comfortable with that. All right, we've covered a lot of ground on the topic of note choice in improvisation, and as I'm sure you've realized, what it really keeps coming back to is that it's all about the ears. And of course, listening and transcribing are huge for this. It's not really the topic of this presentation, but I feel like the jazz police would come after me if I didn't give the usual "you must listen and transcribe" speech. And it's no wonder that Eli sounds so good, so mature for his age, because he transcribes Wes Montgomery and Grant Green solos and listens to jazz all the time. So obviously that makes such a huge difference. But if we can reach those students who maybe, aren't obsessed with jazz, they're in jazz band, they want to sound better. If we can give them some little things that they can latch onto with their ears, and they can start to really hear this concept of tension and release and find some success with that in their solos, it's going to make a huge impact in their musicianship. To recap, we briefly discussed the importance of having students play the roots on their horns to a progression so that they can hear the form. And I think it's crucial that they lay the foundation of the bass line firmly in their ears so that they have a clear reference point for making their note choices. Have all of your jazz band students learn the roots of the chords and be able to play them on their instruments in time for the solo sections of the charts that you're working on. I also recommend teaching the guide tones, and again, not just for your soloists, but for the whole band. Before you know it, you might have a full band of soloists, which I think is sort of one of our big goals in jazz education. We also talked about how to use the blues scale as a device for creating tension and how to coach your students to resolve that tension to the major third in the third bar of each phrase of the blues. Try it with your groups. Have everybody in the band listen for the major third at the end of the phrase in the third bar of each phrase of the blues. You can have them listen for that note, and when they hear it, go, "ah," which is sort of fun and goofy, but it also really reinforces that sense of tension and release and drives that point home for them. This is a really great starting place for them to start branching out from the world of the blanket scale to the world of playing over harmony. Finally, by teaching pentatonic scales and finding different ways of applying them, we can have our students both hitting the chord tones and accessing the upper extensions and color tones in a melodic way without the heavy dose of fear or frustration. I hope this has been helpful and informative, and I look forward to taking your questions later. We've got a panel discussion / Q&A with me and other members of the jazz faculty at UNI. Chris Mertz, our Director of Jazz Studies, Anthony Williams, our trombone professor, and Alex Pershunin, our bass instructor, will all be joining me, and we'll be expanding on these topics and taking your questions on anything jazz education related. How to teach improvisation is sort of the focus, but we're looking forward to hearing from you in terms of whatever you want to ask us. If you have any follow-ups about things I've presented in this clinic, I'd be happy to talk about those things. And of course, beyond this, feel free to reach out. I'd love to work with your groups or your soloists or your rhythm sections, any of the above. Or if you just want to talk about strategies for approaching a solo section on a chart you're working on, or how to maybe apply some of these concepts, I'd love to have a chat with you. So feel free to shoot me an email anytime. All right, everyone, stay sane. I really look forward to the time that we can be in rooms together, making music with one another, and enjoying each other's company. But for now, this will have to do.